So about a week ago, I had someone reach out to me to create a logo for their brand. They saw the video where I make a brand identity for a skateboarding company. They liked the work and they kind of wanted me to do something similar. We had a quick meeting just to kind of go over everything and kind of set the foundation for the project. Now in the skateboarding brand identity video, I kind of skimmed over the logo design process because I kind of already had it all figured out, so there wasn't really much for me to do. But in this case, I do have to figure things out. So I thought this would be a good video to kind of supplement that, since I didn't really go into the logo design that much. Now, the other reason why I wanted to make this video is because he gave me pretty much complete creative control to make whatever I want. During the meeting that we had, whenever I walked away, kind of the expectation was that we were going to make a logo that is untraditional or unorthodox. He told me to push the boundaries, and so we're going to try to push them. Needless to say, it's going to get interesting. The way that I'm approaching this logo is I want to make the worst best logo, or the best worst logo. You get what I mean. I might do some things that some people would say are bad logo designs, but at the end of the day, what we want is just a cool and interesting looking logo that stands out. So it might be bad from an objective point of view, but hopefully from a subjective point of view, good. Truthfully, I have no idea how this logo is going to turn out. I barely have any ideas even in my head, but we're going to figure it out. So one of the first things that I like to do whenever I start working on a logo is I like to create a keyword list at the top of my page, just in case I need to look for some inspiration. So I'll just write down any kind of words or phrases or topics, anything that might have to do with this project. For this project specifically, since it's more of a kind of technology startup, I'm just kind of writing down some things that might be applicable to the company. So like they want to make an impact on the future. So I put future and impact, they want to make a positive impact. They want to kind of have a human aspect to the brand. And so I'm just writing down these keywords. So that way, if I just need some inspiration, I can look back at that and it might just help me get a couple of ideas. But as far as the actual design goes, where I typically start is a notebook. I'll bring out my notebook and then I'll just start writing down ideas as they come to me. I'm not thinking too hardly. I'm not trying to process them. If I have an idea, I write it down. It's good, great, I have it. If not, it's there and I can just forget about it. But really, this is just a great way to just start generating ideas really quickly, and you're not really trying to be a perfectionist. You're just putting the idea on paper so you have it. And it's really low effort, so it's easy just to kind of experiment, try things out, try iterations, and just see what happens and see how things look. Every project is different, and so the process can be a little bit different, because I've had projects where I don't do a whole lot of sketches. I just kind of come up with a handful of ones that kind of get me started. And then there's other times where I take, 3 or 4 pages of just ideas. But really what I'm trying to do is just trying to exhaust myself of any ideas that are in my head and not having any kind of outside perspective or help. I'm not looking up any other logos or any other kind of designs. It's just what's in my head and what do I think. Now, once I feel like I've exhausted all of the ideas that are in my head, tried a bunch of iterations and ideas, but I'm kind of getting to a point where I'm stuck, that's at the point in which I start trying to look up some inspiration. So I might go to Pinterest, Behance, Dribbble, Google, it doesn't really matter, wherever you want to find your inspiration or references from. But I might just start kind of like looking up different aspects of the logo that I'm kind of working on or think might work, in order to see kind of what other people have done and how I can take what they've done and translate it into the logo that I'm doing and make it my own. So for instance, since the company name is SquarePlay, I might look up square logos. That's it. Really simple, really broad, and then I'll just see what people have done with that concept. Sometimes you'll see people do something with a particular way that they compose lines, and then you're like, oh, what if I did that, but I twist it and change it in a way that fits the project that I'm working. That's really what I'm trying to do. Just kind of see the other ideas that people have done and then seeing how I can take that idea and make it my own and make it different. Obviously, I don't want to copy someone. I don't want to make the logo the exact same or take their exact same idea, but I'm just looking for a concept or something that kind of sparks some type of inspiration that makes me go, oh, I could take that and change it here, and it would now be something different and unique, but I'm just kind of using their idea as a starting point. And this is also why I like to draw up as many ideas as I can before jumping into this, because I don't want to have a whole bunch of logos that are inspired by a bunch of other people. So it's good to have a good chunk of ideas and concepts that are just out of my head, just from me, hopefully in the end, I'll be able to create a logo that is unique, but might draw inspiration from other people's logos. Now, as I'm going, I might mark ideas that I think are interesting or that I might want to develop further. And so I'll mark those, and then that way, whenever I'm kind of done with all of my sketching, whenever I start moving into Illustrator, I know which ones to start with and which ones I kind of really want to try out and I think are worth exploring. So really the next part of my process is just kind of bringing the ideas that I really want to explore into Illustrator and actually kind of making the logo real, not my really poorly first grade level sketches. And really this is where the logos really start to take shape, because they're no longer just sketches or ideas in your head. They're actually something on the computer that actually might look somewhat decent, especially because my sketches are incredibly terrible. So I really need to put things into Illustrator and mess with them to make them actually look somewhat decent. But once I have the ideas in, it's really just kind of iterating, taking this idea and, maybe I tweak it in this way or in this way. I do this thing with it, or maybe I change the typography, or maybe I move it up, or maybe I move it down. It's really just iterating. Again, just like with sketches, I'm trying to do this as quickly as I possibly can and not trying to spend too much time thinking things through, because I really just want to get the ideas down and then I can always iterate after that. But as long as I'm not spending too much time on one idea or one logo, usually things go pretty quickly and I can just get as many things and as many iterations as I possibly can. Because once again, this is all just an exploration of just trying things and kind of just chasing that intuition and the ideas that come to you. And especially in a logo like this, where the main goal is kind of to be creative and push the boundaries, you want to be able to explore more and not confine yourselves to the ideas that maybe you would typically if you were designing a logo for some corporate brand that really doesn't want to push the boundaries. They just kind of need something for their business, and they're not really too concerned about making something that's incredible work. They just want a logo that will work for them. And again, from there, it's really just iterating and iterating and iterating until I can't think of anything else anymore. And then from there, I usually start to kind of narrow down the designs that I actually want to present to the client. But once I've gone through the process of from sketching to Illustrator, usually after that, I kind of mix things together a little bit. So usually on the first day, I'll start with sketches, and then I'll move on to kind of looking for inspiration and then move to Illustrator. And then maybe, the second day that I'm doing it, I might do a little bit of all three. So I might start again with some sketches and then move to Illustrator once I've had a couple. And then once I've felt like I hit a roadblock, I'll go back and look for inspiration. After that initial process of sketch, inspiration, Illustrator, I might kind of mix things together a little bit. And I'm really just trying to, once again, just exhaust myself. All right, so it's been a couple days. I've managed to come up with a bunch of different options. But now that we've kind of gone through most of my process, I kind of want to go over just a couple of different things that you might find useful. So first off, I want to show you how I organize my ideas and concepts as I'm going. So now that we're here in Illustrator, as you can kind of see, what I do is I actually lay out my ideas going from left to right. So like for this instance, I was playing around with these block shapes. I'll kind of talk a little bit about that here in a couple minutes. But what I would do is, I would create my first iteration, my second iteration, and I would just go from left to right and then just kind of go all in a line. But if I wanted to explore a different idea that wasn't that, I would then just kind of go up another level. You can kind of see that up here a little bit more easily. Like right here, I was playing with just the typography in a certain way with a single shape. And then the line above it, I'm playing it in a little bit of a different way. I kind of thought of it as a different kind of idea or concept that I was exploring. So I wanted to separate those. And again, if I wanted to explore something that I thought was at least different enough to where I kind of want to have its own section, I would just move everything that I'm working with up. So that way I have kind of a separate space and I can keep everything at least somewhat organized. Another thing that I'll do is I'll mark ideas that I think are worth exploring more or that I just like. I mentioned that I do this in my sketches, but here in Illustrator, I'll just do it in a little bit more of a different way. So for me, what I've been doing is I'll just put like a star or some kind of shape, something that stands out so I know, hey, this is the version of this that I like. Same thing like right here. So even though I did all of these explorations, I know this is the one that I liked the most. And I did kind of break my rule a little bit because I was exploring kind of different variations of the same idea. So if I go in here, so like here would be just without any kind of shape or anything. So that way it's just empty. Here's what it would look like with the shape in it. Here's what it would look like if it was left justified. Just playing around with some of the different variations, but it's the same logo, same typography, same shape. It's just like slightly different variations. It's more so me just exploring the logo system rather than exploring a bunch of different ideas. Now, one of the last things that I really want to talk about in this video is how I come up with my ideas. I've told you my process, but I haven't really told you about how I come up with the ideas that I come up with. Now, like I mentioned earlier before, I'll look up inspiration, and that might definitely help me come up with some ideas. But beyond that, what I'm really looking for is an idea or a concept that I feel like connects me to the brand that I'm working with. A good example of this is these kind of square layouts that I was kind of playing around with here. Since the name of the company is SquarePlay, I was like, well, why don't I just play with squares? And so I was just kind of messing around with this concept to come up with a bunch of different shapes. And I mean, I could do this all day, just kind of taking this kind of grid that you can kind of see here, and then, moving the blocks and connecting them in different ways to get all of these different shapes. And then, it's like, well, here's what it looks like as just squares, then here's what it looks like if I were to bevel all the corners, that kind of thing. This would be another great example of that. I'm taking the idea of playing with squares, and that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm just playing around with the shape of a square and seeing what I can come up with. In this instance, I kind of played around with just hiding the text with the square, and I just thought it was interesting, and I kind of came up with these ideas right here, which I think are pretty interesting. Maybe I can tweak them a little bit or make them a little bit better, but at the very least, it's helping me be creative and try out different things and just kind of play around with a logo. Now, these kinds of ideas don't just kind of pop out of nowhere. Usually they take some time to develop, which is again why I start with my sketching, so I can just blast through a bunch of ideas. I can just put them down, I've got them, and then I can always go back, because sometimes I'll write down an idea and then I'll go, oh, you know what? Now that I'm looking at this an hour later, I see how I can take this idea and turn it into a concept. That's what happened with these logos right here, where I did kind of one just to kind of play around with the idea. And then I was working on some other stuff, and then I was like, wait a second, square play. Why don't I just play around with the squares? Sometimes those ideas come right to you, sometimes they take a minute, and that's why I've been saying this entire time, it's all just about developing the ideas, iterating and iterating, because eventually you'll stumble upon something, and once you find that something, the ideas usually tend to reveal themselves. So I don't want anyone here to think that I'm just some kind of genius that can just come up with a cool logo off the fly. These kinds of ideas take time. Sometimes they might come at the beginning of a project, and sometimes they come after a couple days. And that's why I said I kind of like to work in like a 4-day or 3.5-day period of just working on the logos. So that gives me time to, wake up in the morning, jot down some ideas until I kind of get, burnt out or frustrated, whatever it is, or I just want to take a break. I can take that break, work on something else, come back later, work on it, come back the next day. And then it gives me enough time for me just to kind of settle in with some ideas, do something else, and then maybe have an idea hit me later on. As an example, I started working on this on Friday. Today is Monday, so it's been a couple days, and over the weekend, there was a couple ideas that popped into my head. So I just opened up my project file and just kind of laid out those ideas, and the next thing you know it, I'm working on a couple of different iterations just from that one idea. And I know for me, my creative process tends to have a very similar process of I start something, I'm excited, I've got ideas, I start developing those ideas, they're absolutely garbage, I feel like crap because everything that I make is terrible and I don't even know how I'm going to deliver, something worthwhile to my client. But after a while of developing the ideas and getting through that kind of frustration, I finally come to a result that I'm actually happy with. But that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to talk about, at least in terms of my process and my kind of ideation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on these for a couple of more days. I'm going to pick 3, maybe 4 logos that I want to present to the client. I'm going to make a presentation that I can present to them, and then we'll go from there. So let's keep it moving. All right, so I presented my logos, and then we did another round of logos, and we finally landed on a logo that we like. So here's where we ended up. Now, I know what you're thinking when you see this. Austin, I thought we were making the best worst logo ever. Now, that was my goal initially going into this project, because that's what the client asked me to do. He said, go as far as you want to go, do what you need to do, just make something that looks really cool and really unique. Now, my client was actually excited about what I presented to him, but the more that we talked and discussed, we kind of came to a conclusion that maybe this isn't the perfect direction for us. And the reason for that is investors. So a lot of companies, when they're first starting out, they'll get some people to invest in their company. But of course, whenever someone invests in your company, they're not doing so just, on goodwill, just to give you some money in the hopes that, oh, your company's cool, we want to see it grow. No, they want to have some kind of entitlement to not only the cash that's coming in, but as well as some control over the company. They put money in, so they want to have some control. Kind of makes sense. Now, in my last call with my client, we were kind of going over the logos and talking about what we liked and what we didn't like. And what I was kind of bringing up was some points about, this logo might look really cool and we both really like it, but I don't really know if it's going to fly with investors. They might look at that and say, what's that logo? I don't understand why it looks like this. Or, maybe it just makes them too uncomfortable because it's a little bit too far out of left field, not traditional enough. And my client has cool ideas that he wants to bring to the world. So it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, maybe I would go with this if I didn't have someone leaning over my shoulder, but I do. So in order to get to where I want to go in life and what I want to do with this company, I kind of have to, make some trade-offs. And in this case, the trade-off was going with a more traditional logo. And just to be clear, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Both me and my client wanted to do something a little bit more unorthodox because that's just kind of what we like. But, sometimes you got to do what's more practical. And in this case, a more practical logo is more practical. But at the end of the day, what really matters is that I make a logo that fits their company and their audience and will work for them. So even though we didn't end up with the worst best logo, something really crazy, we did end up with something that looks nice and will work for them. So let's briefly talk about why we went with this logo. So first off, one of the things that my client pointed out in our first presentation of the logos was he was kind of wanting something a little bit more abstract, almost like, the Nike logo or something like that. And so our next round of logos was kind of centered around that. So I wanted to come up with some kind of unique shape that wouldn't really necessarily mean or be something concrete. That way we could have something that, looks unique and maybe intriguing, and that could also, be something on a shirt or something on a sign or, a design asset, something a little bit more ambiguous that we could use in a bunch of different ways. And secondly, what we liked about this logo is it has a little bit of a tech feel to it. It's geometric, but it doesn't have too many sharp edges. So that way it doesn't feel too industrial and it leans a little bit more towards that technology side. And what's also great about it is it can work in a square format or without a square format. So you kind of can play with it in both ways. I'll throw up a small diagram of the dissection of kind of how I made this logo. So that way you can kind of see my thought process. But like I said, is really just made playing around with squares and just trying to find something that looks interesting and fun. So while I didn't end up making the worst best logo like we set out to, we still made something that looks good and is going to definitely serve this client well. Now, the client did say that at some point he would like to move forward with a full brand identity. So hopefully in the near future, he'll hit me back up again and then we'll pick up where we left off with this project. And of course, I'll probably just continue videoing that since we've already started here. So that way you can see kind of what it would be like if I were to start with logos and then end up with a brand design. So if you'd like to see where I take this project next, make sure that you subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video.